Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the last automation guide for American cars, because this decade is 2010s. And not only is it the last decade because automation only goes to 2020, but because American manufacturers basically abandoned sedans, coupes, and everything like that, like starting late 2010s, early 2020s. Because the only car, like sedan, that's made still is the Chevy Malibu. That's the only thing. And the funny thing is, the Chevy Malibu outlasted the Camaro. Yes, they don't make because they discontinued the Camaro. I think this year, and then they didn't discontinue the Malibu. Like you could still buy a brand new Malibu. Look it up on Chevy's website. It's funny, but yeah, basically it's now there's just no American cars. But we'll get into the last decade of these American cars here. I was coughed recording. All right, so of course, body style. Really, anything that's not a crossover. Um, Fuck crossovers because that's the only thing sold now. Crossovers, SUVs, or trucks. It's the only American car. You got to go to Europe or Japan manufacturers if you want to get a sedan now, which sucks. But I mean, uh, but that's the only thing manufacturers make now. I can go into a whole rant about it, but I won't. I'm gonna focus on here. Uh, mm. Panel material, treated steel. Some heavy cars, like full size, now use partial aluminum. Yes. Now partial aluminum is in use. I think even no, full aluminum's still not in use. It's just partial aluminum. Because, like I said, last decade in the 2000, just muscle cars and pickup trucks used them. Now, kind of full sized, like 120-inch wheelbase cars, they use partial aluminum now because it's a little easier on everything, you know. Give me a moment. Okay. Chassis type, of course, unibody, monocoque. Don't call it monocoque because that sounds too funny. Chassis material, corrosion resistant default. AHS steel has finally made the scene in the mid 2010s and are also used in heavy cars, but they're more likely to use AHS steel than a partial aluminum just because it's still steel and steel is cheaper and easier to mold than aluminum. Or, yeah, because steel you could just manufacture it all day. Aluminum, it kind of has to be specialized and pressed and whatnot. But AHS steel, I would say like the mid 2010s, they switched to it like some sort of facelift, you know. Yeah, it's not just a facelift; it's like a body lift as well. Light AHS steel, I wouldn't say cars use that. I would say performance, if anything, because light AHS steel. Like, hold on, I'll show you why, because it's actually kind of like that in real. Because it's like light AHS steel. It's obviously lighter than regular steel. But there's like less safety, comfort, and everything on it because less material is used in light AHS steel than standard AHS steel. So it's like you're gonna want more safety, more steel, and something compare because it's lighter. And also, it's a lot more complicated because AHS steel uses CAD to kind of it's already a little expensive in process because it uses the CAD when making the car to mold the body, and then light AHS steel like further does it. So that's just more engineering work. So it's just regular AHS steel, no light, and then everything else you see here. No engine placement, of course, front transverse. I don't think there's a single front longitudinal car now. Not even like a because the Crown Victoria was completely discontinued in 2010. And that was the last one that used a longitudinal, last sedan to use longitudinal, I'm pretty sure. Of course, front suspension, McPherson strut de facto. Wishbone found on few performance slash luxury cars. I should fix that. Performance and luxury cars. because in the 2010s they really started to focus more on luxury and performance instead of just simply luxury or performance. It's luxury and performance. When we get to the engines, I'll tell you. And of course, rear suspension, multi-link was widely used. A lot more cars used multi-link as they kind of unified the suspension. So it's just like one from one car to another used a suspension. Double wishbone semi-trailing arm could still be used, not as much. Torsion still found on subcompacts such as a Sonic. The Chevy Sonic was like one of the last cars to use rear torsion beams. And push rods, American cars still didn't use push rods. That's like supercar stuff, push rod suspensions. And of course, we are here at the engine. The engine block, you used either an i3, an i4, or an a V6, because i3s, it finally made its place alongside a single turbo, because regular just in inline 3 doesn't make enough horsepower for an American car with like how heavy it is in highway use, and i3 doesn't, so it's like a turbo. And inline 4, still find naturally aspirated inline 4s, but there's also turbos, and then V6s are usually naturally aspirated. Sometimes turboed in like SUVs, trucks, but that's SUV truck. And a lot of i3s and i4s turboed, though. They were shared engines with crossovers, because crossovers are being found more. So it's like you have to put a turbo to power the crossover. So they just kind of traded with each other the engine. So there's that. I think I was getting on that a little bit later. Block material. Block and head materials are all now aluminum. And I think I explained this last time. But ALCY, aluminum silicone's a real thing. I don't think I explained how it was used for linerless engines, because that's, at least for the block, because there's like a liner, sort of a cup sort of thing, so the whole block and head doesn't get messed up by the constant combustion. Aluminum silicone, you don't need that. It's just there. But I'd say, for, like I said, the sake of argument, maybe use aluminum silicone if your engine is going to use a alloy of aluminum and I think nickel usually. They don't really say, it's just aluminum alloy, and it's like, what else is used with it? Shrugs shoulders. All right. And of course, the displacements. Oh, hold on. Before we get ahead of myself. The displacements for inline 3s were 1 liter to 1.5 liters. And they were always found with a balance shaft too, because inline 3s were really designed never to go above 1 liter. But, of course, bigger engine, bigger horsepower, and still sips on that gas. So it's, yeah. So and then inline 4s, 1.8 to 2.5 liters. Of course, any inline 4 above 2 liters has a balance shaft. Sometimes inline 4s would just have balance shafts too, even if it was below that, because they shared the design with the inline 3 sometimes, like the Ford. They all have balance shafts. And all the Ford engineers also hate mechanics, from what I've seen. That's another story. And V6, of course, 2.8 to 4 liters for a V6. Of course, you can't put balance shafts in a V6. And then inline 3s and 4s were under squares by 5 millimeters on average, which means it was bigger stroke than bore. And V6s were still over square by 5 mil, which means it was more bore than square. Than stroke, I should say. It goes into that bore and stroke. It sort of goes into a performance and efficiency thing. Bigger bore, more performance. Bigger stroke, more efficiency. There's a whole thing. Yeah. And then heads and valves, every engine was dual overhead cam 4-valve, as you could see here. Now, I'm pretty sure there was not a single overhead cam 4-valve, if anything. It was just dual overhead cam. Excuse me. 4 valves. And then onto the internals, the crank. It is common to see forged crankshafts in about every engine to help with durability and weight. Yeah. By now, every engine has a forged crankshaft because of that. And it's easy to forge too, because what forging is, well, I never go into this, I should have, but forging is basically you heat the metal up as hot as you can, and then you quickly put water into it, and that strengthens the steel. So it's very easy to forge stuff, so they do it. Then for conrods and pistons, it's still cast for conrods, hypertech for pistons. And of course, forged for turbos. And then, as you can see here, you could use forged for everything if something like performance luxury than economy. Something, because this is actually a engine used for sort of a performance luxury sort of thing. Because direct fuel injection and everything, I'll get that here. Under 66 horsepower, 161 pound-foot of torque out of a 2-liter engine. That's a little bit on the higher end. I seem to make more, but that's still on the higher end of things. It's for performance. And for that, it needs all forged stuff, or else, because the power and the RPMs, it won't meet that, so you used forged. But if it's just like a regular economy engine, it's still like forged crank, cast conrods, hypertech pistons, you know. And of course, harmonic damper or balance shafts. Either one. Use whichever one. I'm actually going to use a balance shaft, actually, for a good example. Just cause. Let's see here. Balance shafts were implemented in just about every i3 and i4 now. Yes, I did say that. Tuning. As much horsepower, because everything is a sports car now, opposed to 60s where everything was a muscle car and is based. But I'll tell you why. Everything was a muscle car in the 60s is because they tuned it as high as they could because gas was cheap. And now they tune everything as high as you can because technology has caught up. So now you can actually make something have high horsepower and still have a high fuel economy, as opposed to have high horsepower and just pay for fuel because it's like 5 cents a gallon. Let's see here. RPM limit. Bleh. They do RPM limits can rev high now. Yeah. VVL. I didn't say this. No, never mind. VVL just was found now this decade. So I've used in Ford's Ecotec in 2012 and Chrysler's Pentastar in 2016. VVL, what's that? It's basically, Honda VTEC. That's what VVL is. Basically, there is a little profile, like right here is like a lower profile, and then you get to a certain RPM, and it heightens that camshaft, and you go power. And then VVT, I actually didn't say this last video, but VVT started to be used in the 2000s. With just intake if you had dual cams. In single cam, of course, you couldn't have dual intake, but VVT started in the 2000s, but in the 2010s, VVT started to go to both intake and exhaust camshafts now. And of course, turbo. Single turbos finally sees themselves being used in tiny i3 crossovers. Tiny i3s and any crossover shared inline 4s starting in mid-2010s. So yeah, basically engines shared with crossovers. Like this engine is shared with a crossover technically in lore, but it's not turbocharged because it doesn't need to be turbocharged because it's on a light enough car. I'll show you once I actually make it. But yeah, inline 3s more than likely have a turbocharger. Inline 4s may or may not, and then V6s usually don't in a car. Injection, multi-point fuel injection was still being used, but it was sort of sequential fuel injection. than multi-point, but injections, I guess. And direct injection was being used in standard engines by late 2010s, usually mid in vehicles like a Buick. This is 2010 and it's using direct injection, but Buick actually did use direct injection in at least 2010. I think it was GM that really started using direct injection because, as I said last video, Cadillac was like the first to use sort of a direct injection in America. So GM used direct injection first, but it's like, yeah, I'd still say direct injection 2010 is still justified. Not just lazy like here, it's justified, yeah. But really, direct injection's used, like I said, for like luxury performance. If it's not a luxury performance, it'd use multi-point. Config, single points, still widely used. Performance engines use twin individual. Says, yes. You got a single configuration. This twin is V6, of course, and then per cylinder. Yeah, but it's still single. To get a variable intake manifold, I think variable was more found, speaking of intake manifolds. Variable is just what's used base all the time. I couldn't confirm that, but basically every manifold is... it was hard to research the manifolds. I couldn't find nothing about it. I could find the direct injection, what type of direct injection, nothing about the intake manifold. If it was variable, if it was a single, I couldn't find nothing about it. It's so weird. But I did find out that at least variable was used a lot more than like standard mid or performance because of how variable works. You could either get low end or high end stuff. I would say just use it on what type of car it is, economy, non-economy, performance, etc. E10 87 AKI is still used by NAG engines. E10 89 AKI is choice for TUM turbos. 91 and 93s now come in E10. E85 is much more widespread, etc. Blah blah blah. There's fuel. And of course, like I said last video, if it's E85, it would be more it'll be a different tune. I mean, yes. If it's E85, it would use a different tune. But of course, something else happened in the 2010s. Hybrid cars started to be more of a thing in the 2010s, and of course, electric cars kind of replaced E85. So E85 actually kind of died out for that here. Hold on a second. Let me change that. E85 starts to die thanks to hybrid and electric. So yeah, there's that. But E10 ethanol is still used today. Headers, cast mid still de facto to this day because cast is just the easiest to make, and then tubular for performance because tubular you need more hands-on than cast. Of course, it's cast mid because it's made in a cast, and tubular is sort of not, but also, yeah. Yes, but no. Catalytic converter, pre-cat three-ways are more likely needed to meet emission standards. Yeah, because I mentioned this last video. If you saw a three-way pre-cat, it's not used yet, but now with increasing emission standards, you'd more than likely need a pre-catalytic converter. Because especially if you are paying attention to emissions, stuff like this. Like right here. It meets it. Because if you put in just a high flow three-way, well, it actually still meets it. Oh. I'd say by 2010, just use a pre-cat, because just about every car still had a pre-cat. Just because of how clean emissions it made, you know. Of course, first and second mufflers are now a must. High flow three-way for performance / luxury. And that's about it for the engines. Wait, did I mess something up? No, never mind. I'll fix it later. I should say one thing about the trim bodies. Just about no car There were all sedans, if anything. There weren't coupe variations. They were rare. I don't think there were convertible variations either. There were definitely no wagons by 2010s. Hatchbacks, coupes, hatchbacks I think were a different thing. But yeah. Design features. There are a couple, like always on headlights or daytime headlights are now a thing because I learned this from American Truck Simulator is that you have to have headlights on from like dusk till dawn. And I looked it up and there's like 30 to 40 states. No, there is like 40 states that require headlights on or daytime headlights or something like that. Um, that actually started a little bit earlier, but cars just now have sort of something like this, like a daytime headlight. I wouldn't say much else. A fake dual exhaust for performance. Even though this is inline 4 and there's just one exhaust, you got a dual exhaust because you can't do that. You just kind of split the pipe. There's really not much else to say. Those automation messed up the wipers. Dadgummit. Oh, that's why, because I'm not gonna fix that. I'm too lazy for that. But yeah, basically, just daytime headlights, I guess. There's really not much else to say here. I guess sharp designs. There's really not much else. It's kind of getting soulless, if I say so myself. Enough about that. All right, front wheel drive with all wheel drive becoming more common options even on low-end cars, albeit with the rear suspension allowing it. Yes, so now you have a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive option in just about every car. And I mentioned last time I went into much detail, but I'm not going to go into it detail this much. But now I could say if your car uses all-wheel drive, it would definitely be either viscous, helical, or advanced. It just depends on the performance, the price range, and everything else. Because I'd say viscous is the cheapest, then helical, then advanced. On demand, it's still used in like crossovers and SUVs. I don't think cars still have on demand. Japanese cars used on demands, but not American cars, I'm pretty sure. So it's just viscous, helical. They're more or less viscous or helical and not much advanced, but it's still, yeah. This a premium car, so it uses viscous, but it's an inline 4. I'd say if it's a V6, it'd probably get a helical. Differentials that usually open, but you can match up the differentials with get viscous, cheapest, helical, then electric. Electric is also very high-end, high-tech, etc. And then, let's see here, 6+ speed automatics were everywhere, with the manuals being wiped out. And if manuals were an option, it was 5 or 6 speeds. And I'd say 6-speed automatics were everywhere because actually in the 2010s, there weren't many 6-speed autos. It was like Chrysler had the Torque Flight 8-speed. There was like some sort of 8 or 7-speed GM had. Ford in like the mid 2010s had like a 10-speed automatic, but that was used more or less on their the F-150s. But basically, advanced automatics just had a lot of gears, more than 6. And then manuals were just like, yeah. There was a CVT. There was a 1 CVT, the Ford CVT, but we don't talk about the Ford CVT. And then auto manual, dual clutch, sequential, none of that. None of that. And then guidelines for gearing setup. Cars are efficient enough to have short gears like 3.7, still common to find in low gears, 2.7. So like, yeah, 2.7 to 3.7 into gears. And then a mini gears and minor transmission, usually you have to first gear up to a 35 miles an hour, 56 kilometers per hour. This one has it up to 31 because it's a 6-speed and not like an 8-speed, but that's still sort of a guideline, like 30, 35 miles an hour in the first gear, and then just kind of go up from there. Of course, use the simple gear ratio. if you just can't. It takes a lot of knowledge to really tune gears perfectly, I won't lie. So it's like, yeah, open LSD, probably. I have so many typos. I hate to see the typos in my last guides. Radials with thin 55 sidewalls and big rims. As you can see the example, 205 55 R18 is a good size to start. Tire width and rim size may vary on wheelbase and option package. As you can see here, this car is it's actually a little different. It's radials, medium compounds, 205 55 R17s with alloy rims. This is sort of a smaller car with a 2.7 meter wheelbase. So I'd say start the alloys at like 17 inches, 18 inches maybe. And then, I think actually it's something else. Alloy rims are standard by this era, and with mags being optioned on big 18 plus inch rims. Yes. Magnesiums usually start at like 18 inches and go up to like 20, still depending on the car, tire size, because it's like 20 inches on this thing. Looks like crap, but then again, the tire size doesn't go, because the tire size, like, as thin as it can go is like 50s into 55, so it's like, as big as this would go, this is like as big as this car would go. 205, 55 R19s. So just keep 50 to 55 sidewalls if you're going to do with that. Alloys, carbon fiber, steels wasn't really used, like I said. Carbon fiber, no. Brakes. Front and rear vented brakes find their way to standard cars, but some still use rear solids. But that's just if brake fade allows. Really light cars just used brakes, just solid discs. But this car weighs actually like 3,200 pounds, 3,300 pounds. This car weighs like 3,300 pounds, so it needed vents front and rear. And there were like some subcompacts. The Chevy Sonic, actually, I'm pretty sure, uses rear drum brake pads. It's so light it can use drums. But it's so light though. It's like 2,400 pounds or so. It's very light. But I'd still recommend you use 4-way solids all the way around. Aerodynamics. Cars started getting some under trays. Cooling flaps had some use, and some luxury cars even have under trays. Yeah, basically. Like, you could finally find an under tray on a car, because I'm pretty sure GM cars had under trays, and I want to say Lincoln did too, but I couldn't find much. I found like an part for some sort of Lincoln. I think it was an under tray, but it was mostly GM. So it's like now you can finally put under trays in your premium cars. They still don't on like regular cars, like a Malibu, but on something like a Buick, you could still probably find one. And then cooling flaps, I wouldn't say those are used until, what is it? Like, you only get less than half a mile per gallon more with the cooling flaps. So I wouldn't say use cooling flaps until you get like a mile per gallon more or something. Or whatever the metric equivalent is. I don't know. It's an American car. What are you doing using metric anyways? I mean, American cars use half metric and half imperial. It's really funny, but it's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Uh, Enough about that. Seats, bench rear, bucket front, regular interior you want. For entertainment, infotainment is standard as soon as standard infotainment is unlocked. HUD probably on very late models like 2019 models made for 2020. Yeah. HUD's really still used in cars. Infotainment is still used in cars to this day, actually. I'd say infotainment. Yeah, I'd say infotainment's still the standard. And then HUD's really just for maybe a gimmick or something like that. There's a tech pool used for the infotainment unlocked, and I got +5. So if you don't unlock infotainment in 2010, that's probably why. So there's that. Variable steering is standard. Electronic steering found on some cars, but not too many. That's really just because there was a big debate on switching from hydraulic to electric because of how it works. Of course, electric, you have to turn the car on for it to work. Hydraulic can kind of just work as long as the wheel's unlocked because of how it works. There's a big thing, so I'd say lighter cars would probably use electric because in case the thing fails, you could still kind of whip it around. ESC standard on all cars now, of course. Launch control. LC is launch control. That's not used anymore. That's not used in a regular car. That's used on supercars and crap like that. Some muscle cars, actually. The Jeep Grand Cherokee SRT8 has launch control. Fun fact. Just a little fact there. It's funny to me. Standard is still being used cars today. Same with progressive. And active suspension is now a thing, but is now an option because it was like every manufacturer has some sort of active suspension. It's called some sort of like special thing, but I couldn't tell you what they're called. But every manufacturer has an active suspension now, so it's like, of course, sport, comfort, use for what you want. Dampers, they're still, I'd say adaptive is now the standard damper, if anything, because even if like standard springs, adaptive dampers, because of you could pick either like a luxury or sport mode. It goes along with ESC and whatnot. You know, just or if you still want a basic suspension system, you can. And then sway bars. I don't think active sway bars are really used. They're still just passive, maybe semi-active, but not many. But sway bars are still just basic sway bars from what I've seen. And really sporty feeling suspension, like 1.5 Hertz springs and 0.3 dampers. This is very sporty. It's sort of sporty, sort of comfort, but it's more or less just springs usually higher than dampers. Sway bars, of course, still from the 60s. I've talked about sway bars. And then cars can be generally tall or short, depending on the package and car itself. Because, yes, I'd say this is like a standard. This might be still too low. Yeah, something like that. Just kind of imagine like fitting a hand in there, because that's usually like a good guide to see if you could fit a hand in there like straight up and down. That's usually how tall cars are because of weight and stuff like that. And of course, that's it. Actually, yeah, that's it. All right, and that is finally the last decade of the American car. Because now there's, like I said, crossovers, SUVs, and trucks made. Yeah, I guess that's all there is. I just say, yeah. So, thanks for watching this series. If you made it all the way through, and the next series I'll do is probably Japan. When's that coming? I don't know. Soon. Don't count on it. But thanks for watching. If you want this guide, it's in the description. If you don't want to hear me out.